Well, Anna Sakawsky, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me and for getting my last name right.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm excited to chat with you for a variety of reasons. We were connected through the Homestead Living magazine, which I've been fortunate enough to contribute just a little bit to, and come to find out you have this very vibrant homestead up in the middle, and you can tell us more about that in a second. But I think it's the middle of Vancouver Island and a really great website and lots of great material and content and coursework, which we'll get into as well, on homesteading and living off the land a little bit more. But as we get into that, let's say it that way, why don't you give us a little bit of the backstory? How did you and your husband end up in the middle of Vancouver Island, and then kind of why homesteading?
Mhm. So both my husband and I grew up in Vancouver, so in the city. And we really did not have any exposure to homesteading at all growing up. We don't come from families who did this. We actually grew up in the same townhouse complex as each other, like around the corner. We didn't know each other until we met later in life, but
That's
it
cool.
was a very suburban upbringing. Yeah, no real exposure other than, a little bit of gardening that I did with my grandpa when I was a kid. He had a backyard garden because he grew up in a day and age. He was born during the Great Depression, back when homesteading was just what people did. It wasn't even called homesteading at the time, it was just life, right? So he had carried a bit of that with him, but as we all know, that got lost somewhere, over the last few decades. And so we had no real exposure to it until we were in our 20s. And for me, a lot of it came first from not feeling happy, honestly, in the city, not feeling like that was the right place for me, never feeling at home there. And I did a lot of traveling in my early 20s. And every time I would travel or live abroad, I would always look at it through the eyes of like, well, maybe this is the place. Maybe I could live here. I was always searching for something, but couldn't quite put my finger on what it was I was searching for. And then my husband and I actually met through working in travel together. And after dating for a while, we basically said goodbye because I decided to move to Australia. And I went and did that for a year, but we stayed in contact. And within a few months, he decided to join me there. And so we did that trip together and then came home, and, the rest is essentially history. But on that trip, being, young and broke and traveling and everything, we were, living in various places where we had to save money. And that came down to a lot of like cooking from scratch, not even totally from scratch at that time. There was definitely some ramen noodles involved, but we weren't just eating out, and like we had to kind of stretch our money. So we go to the grocery store, and we usually it was the from scratch ingredients that were cheapest. We were also watching a lot of cooking shows at this time. We had found like a free TV on the side of the road when we were living in Byron Bay, and there was a lot of those like cooking challenge shows and whatever that were on in Australia. So we were getting inspiration from that. And so that part of the journey really started there and getting interested in cooking. And we brought that home with us. So when we got back to Vancouver, we continued that on. And I was super excited to get back to our own place where we had a proper kitchen, because we didn't have that a lot when we were on the road, or, we were sharing it with other people or whatever. And so we carried that kind of love of cooking and food. And that, led me to being more interested in the ingredients themselves, where the food came from, that sort of thing. Now, at the same time as this, when we arrived home, I started going through a bout of anxiety and depression, and just again not feeling right where we were living. I couldn't put my finger on what it was that was making me anxious and depressed, but I just knew that this wasn't the right path for us, or this wasn't the right environment for me. And so all of this kind of culminated into, somehow we started getting onto watching a lot of documentaries that were on Netflix at the time. And at that time, this is around 2012, a lot of the big food documentaries that a lot of us are familiar with, so Food Inc. and Farmageddon and those type of documentaries, those were all really big at that time. So we found ourselves kind of binge watching these. And a lot of them also talked about the link between our modern lifestyle and things like anxiety, depression, health issues, this and that. And, they were really an expose on these large scale agricultural systems, and these things that are not healthy for us. They're not healthy for the planet. They're not healthy for the animals, like all these things. And it all started to click together for me. And I started going like, oh, I think this could be the thing. Because at the same time, in these documentaries, they were also showcasing people who were doing things differently, right? Who were going back to the land, who were producing their own food, who were, doing things more sustainably, eating locally, all this sort of thing. And and it all started to click that like maybe this is the thing. Like maybe this is the lifestyle change that we need. And that was really the first time I heard the term homesteader in the modern context anyway. And so it started to just kind of bring all these elements together where we were already interested in the food and the cooking aspect of things and getting more interested in the ingredients. And now I became really interested in like sourcing ingredients locally from local farmers. We were living in a condo at the time, so we couldn't really grow much. But I started learning about foraging, right? I'd go out and all of a sudden I would see things that were there the whole time that I just never noticed, like an apple tree or a blackberry bush. And all of a sudden I started seeing things with through new eyes, right? That, oh my god, there's free food just out here for, for the taking. And oh, and I can go and stock up seasonally from local farms. And I wasn't even doing any canning or major preserving at that time, but I would just freeze stuff, right, rather than just go to the grocery store whenever I wanted things. Like, it was just a whole new way of looking at things, and it got me really excited. It gave me a bit of purpose, and I actually felt that cloud of depression and anxiety start to lift with this. And so it very quickly turned into like, okay, we want to follow this lifestyle. Or it might have been more me and dragging my husband along, but he's been a good sport this whole time. So we kind of made a plan to leave the city and looked at where we wanted to go and start homesteading. And we ended up choosing Vancouver Island for a few reasons, but um, we ended up coming to the Comox Valley. So that's where we are now. We can get into that and what all that has to offer as far as homesteading is concerned. But we had to make a plan. Like it didn't happen overnight. And this is like for anybody who's thinking about homesteading, about moving to a new property, or, it doesn't always happen overnight. And so my best tip would be to start where you're at. And that's what we did. So we started trying to grow a little food. We totally failed, but honestly, it was for lack of knowledge and skills at that time, more so than it was lack of space. Like we couldn't grow the gardens or, certainly raise the animals or anything like that we're doing today in our condo with a north facing balcony, shady balcony. But, if I had had the knowledge I have today, we could have done more than what we were doing. But we did. We started growing herbs. We tried to start some seeds, which failed miserably. We started carrot seeds indoors and I saturated them and they just like wilted and died. We had a lot of little projects that we started dipping our toes into that were just total failures, but we were dipping our toes into it. And every once in a while we'd have some success with something and we just fell in love with this and wanted to expand. And so we did what we could. A lot of it was just learning voraciously. I'd go to the library, I'd take out all sorts of books. We'd watch all the documentaries. We were just getting right into it, and kind of made a plan for down the road to move out of the city. And that's essentially what we did. After we got married and I finished with school, I think is 2015, and we moved out to the Comox Valley on Vancouver Island, and that's where we've been ever since.
It's awesome. You bring up a really good point about, kind of start where you're at. A lot of people, are not fourth, fifth generation, homesteaders. They're not getting a sweet, you know, um, legacy property or something like that handed down by grandma and grandpa or something like that. And to your point earlier about losing some of the skills, yeah, over the last couple of generations, I think, grandpa's not teaching us how to do these things anymore. And our dad certainly hasn't been, or mom or whatever. And it's not necessarily their fault. It's just how all these things begin to change. And there's some, I guess, commentary you can make kind of post World War II and some of the things, that happened and changed everything and got people a little bit more comfortable, quote unquote. But yeah, we've lost a lot of that kind of hand-me-down knowledge. Um, and the idea is similar for us. We lived in the suburbs outside of Seattle for a long time, and we're raising six kids, and we had a little kind of courtyard thing, and we planted herbs and pots I got from my mom, or I think old coffee cans, and we just tried to grow whatever we could. And talk about north south facing. I mean, it didn't face any sun. We were desperate to grow whatever we could, but again, you made the comment, when you did have a little bit of success, and for me, it was like rosemary or thyme or sage, or and it was healthy, and you could use it on whatever piece of meat you're grilling or something. I mean, it was so satisfying. Um,
Yeah.
and even taking cuts of meat from Costco or wherever we bought the meat, and then trying my hand at some of the old school, European style charcuterie, salumi, that sort of thing. I mean, in our pantry in the suburbs, we have, pork bellies hanging and pancetta, curing and all these things. So,
Yeah.
because not everybody has the opportunity, like I said earlier, to have this plot of land and it's all ready to go, and all you have to do is manage it. You have to start from someplace, and then
Yeah.
hopefully you can grow it to whatever you want. But anyway, enough
Yeah.
about that.
Well, I was just gonna
Go
say
ahead.
too,
Yeah,
a great place to start, as we did, is in the kitchen. And I tell people this all the time, is that you might not have land to grow a garden, but almost everybody, if you have a roof over your head, has some sort of kitchen, right? And so maybe it is starting to just cook from scratch. Maybe it's sourdough you're starting with. Maybe it's preserving food that you buy at the grocery store, right? In season or from farm markets or whatever. So, and now, like I say, looking back with some of the knowledge I have now, I mean, there are like we could have been growing sprouts or microgreens on our counter or mushrooms in our closet, or, like there's always a workaround and there's something you can do. And it's really more about the skills than it is about, I think some people get too wrapped up in, oh, one day when I have this perfect plot of land, I'll start homesteading.
right.
But what if that one day either doesn't come or it takes forever? And then what if it happens? And then now you have to learn everything from scratch. Start where you're at, and then you'll have some skills, some transferable skills that you can expand on when you get more land.
Oh, 100%. 100%. No, that's really well said. Mushrooms in the closet, that would be an interesting one. It, I guess, would depend on, what kind of sports you're playing and no, I'm kidding. But I was going to make a comment about what you just said about working in the kitchen and that sort of thing. Oh, sourdough is always the fun one, right? That's kind of the gateway, right,
The
into
gateway
all
drug, I
this.
was gonna say, yeah.
I think every one of these, websites, periodicals, everything has got something about sourdough and starting it, keeping it, and all that. And of course, when we had the pandemic stuff, a lot of people went back to making sourdough, right? That was becoming one of the cool things, was how do I bake bread at home? And unfortunately, a lot of people probably ditched it once everything was quote unquote back to normal. But yeah, that's awesome. Well, your house and homestead, middle of Vancouver Island, you landed there. Um, with that philosophy of you got to start somewhere. Uh, the elevator pitch, right? The idea of riding up the floor with somebody and say what it makes you different. Why is your homestead different from the other ones that we see on YouTube or somewhere else?
Hmm. Well, right now we're on a quarter acre. So we don't have the sprawling 10 acres and a milk cow, as I like to say,
Mhm.
right? We're working in kind of more of a suburban plot. We're technically rural and we're back onto a forest or to a green belt. And we're at the end of a no-through road, technically in the rural part just outside the city of Courtney. But we're just off a cul-de-sac too. So like I'm looking out the window right now and I can see my neighbors, and so we're a little, I always say it's like the business in the front, party in the back. We're kind of a foot in both worlds, right? So we have backyard chickens and we're allowed to keep them, and we've got our garden. And the nice thing is where we live, like a lot of people have gardens here. And so living in close proximity to neighbors means we can trade and that sort of thing too. So there's some benefits. But I think that what is the difference is that I'm showing people that you can do it on a smaller plot of land, and not just where we are now, but we started in a condo, and there's lots you can do in a condo or in an apartment, even if it's a rental. Then we lived on a rental property for 3 years. And that's where we really dipped our feet into this, where we started really growing a garden. There was an apple tree on that property, luckily. So that, that's how I started canning. That's where we started doing all this. As when I launched the blog, we were still in a rental. So even if you're on a rental property, there are things you can do. And then now we're here and we're doing a lot more, and we own the land. So there's a lot more we can do. And eventually we'd love to expand and get more land. But I think it's just being able to show that at each of these stages, there are things you can do and you can be a homesteader, right? You don't need all of the acreage and, all the animals and all the things in order to be a homesteader. It's more of a mindset. And, it's just more about, for me, it's about being a producer rather than simply a consumer.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, produce whatever it is that you can. Yeah, I love
Mhm.
that. Um, that's a great that's a great elevator speech. I like that.
Tall
Uh,
building, right?
it's still, yeah, tall building. Yeah, it's gonna
Long
take a
speech.
minute to get to the top, but no, it does cover it though. You and I were at this modern homesteading conference. I don't know, did your spouse join you? Were you there?
He was, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I didn't
My
get a chance
husband
to
and
meet
my
him.
kids were there. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. We had one of our kids there. So me and my wife and one of my sons, and we had a blast. And we met so
Yeah.
many people from all over the well, really the world, technically, if you count Canada, right? But North America, primarily. And everybody had just a slightly different story. And that's what's kind of cool about this, sort of community, is that everybody starts with something, and some, might be doing a whole bunch, some might just be doing a few things, and certainly some have become sort of specialists in certain things as well. And that makes it really fun to interact and again commune with all these people. Not to try to sound super spiritual or anything like that, but it really is a cool group of people.
Mhm.
I think that was the one of the biggest takeaways that we had from that conference, was uh, just how cool the people were. I didn't really
Yeah.
know what to expect. I didn't know if it was going to be a bunch of, hippie types, or what, but
Yeah.
it was all kinds of walks of life and all for different reasons, and it made it really fun.
Yeah, it's a real good energy, and it's funny because at the end of that conference, I actually did a speech on this exactly, on homesteading on a smaller property and how what you can do at each different level. And mine was the last speech of the day on the last day, and then from there, everybody went and gathered. They had set it up so that you could find your local area. So there were people from the Pacific Northwest, people from, the Southwest, from the Southeast, from the North. Like they had it all broken down so you could find people in your general area and connect with them in person, which was so cool. And then of course there was and Canada, which is like the whole country of Canada gets one spot. But that energy at the end of that conference was like it was something else. It was next level. So it's if just to anybody listening out there, if you ever do get a chance to go to one of these events, there's lots of them popping up now, and actually find your people in person, because the beauty of the internet nowadays, and this is kind of why I started my blog and everything, is that we can share with each other and connect with each other online, which is fantastic. But there's nothing like that in person fellowship, right?
Oh,
And
100%.
learning from people in person and sharing and hugging and doing all the things, and
Yeah.
especially because so many people nowadays like that are into this lifestyle or getting into it feel like they're alone, right? They feel like people that are close to them, their family members, their friends, their neighbors are like, "What are you doing?" And they think that they're crazy. So to find other people that totally get you and know you're not crazy, or maybe we're all just crazy together, right?
Yeah, it's probably that. No, but the part of it is, to me, is you think you're not doing a very good job because you see on, YouTube or all these cool websites like you have or whatever, like, wow, people have this stuff down. It's like a machine out at their place, and they're doing all of it. They're doing the herbal remedies, and then they're milking the goat every day, and making their soap. Like, and you just imagine this punch list that is, you're gonna have, the reason you probably had 10 or 12 kids all the time was just so they could get the work done. But the
So
truth
funny because
is,
I always think about that, and I think if I had 10 or 12 kids, I just have 10 or 12 kids that don't want to help. I have
yeah,
two kids and I struggle. I'm like, help me weed. I will pay you. So don't come to me for parenting advice as far as homesteading goes.
that's
But yeah.
funny. Um, but so it looks like, some that everybody's got it down. But what we find out when you do meet them in person, based on what you're talking about, is that everybody's at a different stage. You tackle some things. What was it? I think Justin Rhodes says a lot, that, and I'm not quoting it exactly right, but basically, kind of do what you can and get rid of the stuff that you can't do in your area. He says it more
Yeah.
eloquently than that, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think to your point anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody is at a different point. Everybody's situation is different. I think I get caught up in this too, right? I see people online that seem like they have it all together and they're doing it with a large family, and it seems like the end. But when you talk to them, right? Because I've done a lot of interviews with these people too, and just for the magazine and different things that I do, and you realize that they don't necessarily have it all together either. They're also watching other people, right? And then I've got people watching me, looking at me and what I post, like, oh, she knows what she's doing, but I've had to learn it all from scratch as well. And just, like with anything, you got to remember when you see it online, people are curating it and showing their best selves
Right.
and showing that perfectly. It's like if I do a blog post, and we can talk about the blog in a minute, but, I might do a recipe and take 50 photos of that one and then find the best one. And then that's what gets posted and it looks perfect, right? But you don't see the pile of laundry behind there and the dirt on the floor and it's like the eggs with the poop on them that come out of the chicken coop, because let's
Right.
be real, they don't come out looking like the grocery store eggs all the time. Like
Exactly.
this life is messy and dirty too, but that's what makes it good and fun. And, I feel like the way we're supposed to live, not everything is perfect and curated and Instagram worthy, right?
Yeah,
It's not
right.
real
Yeah.
life.
it's like the Redfin or the Zillow or whatever in the house for sale, and you're like, wow, that somebody really hired a really good photographer because when I drove up to that place, it looks does not look like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's we I remember I'll just share one quick thought. We when we very first butchered our first cow, we were kind of we had the properties like we got to do something with this, and we reluctantly went into beef. We knew we wanted to at some point, but we had the opportunity, and anyway, we raised it, and here came the bullet, and there it went, right? And I paused for a second, and I really went, whoa! Like I thought I could, handle it. I didn't get, emotional or anything, but it was kind of like, well, maybe I do want my meat wrapped in, cellophane or whatever, and easier to get because it's cut perfectly because that's not what I thought it was. And I mean, I've seen documentaries, seen the thing, but to see a cow that you just spent, a year, feeding, and then now, it's going to be cut up and then it's going to be in your freezer at some point, there was a pause. There was a barrier that we both, my wife and I, had to kind of get over. And
Hmm.
now, of course, now that we're across that line, we literally will never go back. Even if somehow we lose everything, we are never
Hmm.
going to,
Hmm.
you know, go back into the sub. And we're going to buy a share of a cow like forever now because it's just a completely different connection to it.
Yeah.
Uh,
And you know
and
what? It's funny because the whole like you'll never go back. I was gonna say that when we were talking about like meeting other homesteaders and stuff, is that I have never met somebody that's actually gotten into this lifestyle who's turned back. You may pull back in certain seasons. I think the number one thing that does when people do give up, it's usually people that are fairly new to it and take on way too much at once. And don't realize that it is work just because it's the simple life, quote unquote, doesn't mean it's easy, whether it's
right,
an emotional toll, like having to harvest an animal, or it's you're losing crops, or you have projects that fail. Failure is the name of the game. And, like you have to be able to kind of withstand some of that. And if you take on too much at once, I think it can get overwhelming. But I think that most people find that even though it can be a hard life in some aspects, not as hard as it used to be 100 years ago, and people literally had to live this way,
right.
right? Live or die this way. It can be hard. There's a lot of emotion that gets wrapped up in it. There's a lot of like you put your blood, sweat, and tears literally into growing a garden, raising animals, things that you're making, whatever it is, and things you lose crops, you lose animals, things go sideways, and it certainly for any of us make you go like, is this worth it? Really?
Right.
It is easier at the end of the day to just go get it from the grocery store. But I think you quickly realize that it's about so much more than that, and it is worth it.
100%. You talked about success and, growing at the condo or in the apartment or something and seeing something sprout up or whatever is what I was kind of picturing as you were sharing that. I mean, I get protective now of the animals and our vegetables and things like that. Like people, oh, do you want this? And I'm like, whoa, whoa, no, I mean, I'm going to think twice before I started, handing out all this hard work that we basically did. Funny story, even today, one of my beef customers, or is becoming one, and he had bought a share of a beef from somebody in the past. And he said, "Hey, can any chance I can get a sample, a sample steak?" And I'm like, joking? I'm gonna give you. I mean,
Like a steak.
this is my beef. Why would I
Yeah.
give you? Anyway, what happened was they had bought one before. It was not a good experience, and so wife was a little bit nervous about it. And so I'm going to do it. But I remember, pausing for a second and going, uh, I don't think I want to give that up, even if it
Hmm.
means I can sell a whole half a beef to this guy. But
Well,
anyway,
because you
because you get
learn the
protected.
value. Yeah, you learn the value of food, like the true value. It's been undervalued, let's be honest, for so
Yeah,
long because of, government subsidies and all sorts of things, right? Where it's like the food that we buy at the grocery store is even now with inflation is probably undervalued in a lot of cases in terms of what it really takes to grow and harvest and produce that food, right? And so when you're doing it yourself, you are much more connected to it. You do value it a lot more. You're less likely to waste it, right?
totally.
You're more grateful for it. And for me, it doesn't matter how many times I do it. And now we're in our ninth year of gardening. So we started growing a garden, like a proper garden. The first year we moved to the island when we were in our rental property, we put in a couple raised beds. So this is, tip for anybody who might be in a rental, like check with your landlord because ours let us put in a couple raised beds. They were easy enough to dismantle after, right? And that's how we started. We started growing food there. And then now, we grow a big garden that's expanding every year. And every year though, I still like you plant the seeds and you're like, hmm, I feel like maybe this won't work this time or something. Like, I don't know, maybe are they going to come up? I don't know. And then they do. And it's like a miracle every single year
Right.
all over again. I don't know. It's good for the soul, I think, right? Like there are the
100%.
physical health benefits to eating good, organic, healthy, homegrown food and everything, but there's something about it that is just feels like it's the way we're meant to live. When everything comes prepackaged at the grocery store and you're disconnected from it, I don't know, you just don't have the same. It takes away a bit of our purpose, quite honestly. I think at the end of the day, I think we're meant to be producers. We are
Yeah.
creative beings. We're meant to create and produce. And if you ask most people, like when they are most, not necessarily even happy, but most fulfilled, it's when they are producing something, whether it's a creative art or whether it's growing food or, right? When you're just simply being a consumer, right? And I do think that at the end of the day, that does have something to do with so many people feeling anxious and depressed because it wasn't just me. We know this is an epidemic now, right? And I
Right.
think that it has something to do with the fact that life has gotten so easy in terms of comfort and convenience that technically we have it better than we've ever had it before. So then why are so many people feeling like this, right? Well, I think because you take away a little bit of people's purpose, right? If you don't have to be putting your hand to something and creating something, if everything just shows up via Uber Eats or whatever,
Right.
then what purpose do you have here? Right. And I'm not saying you don't have one, of course there, but like, and I think that we could get into a way rabbit trail with this stuff, right? But it's like everything happening with AI now and everything. Like once you take that creative process, that innate desire in us to produce something, to put our hand to something, to create and outsource it, technically, yes, it's easier, but is it as fulfilling? No. And so, even though it might be harder to do the work ourselves, at the end of the day, I think that it's better for us. And I think that most people would agree in some capacity anyway that's what makes it worth it, even if the work itself is hard.
Oh, yeah, really well said. The undervalue versus value I wrote down on my little notepad over here.
Hmm.
Farmed by humans. You mentioned
Yeah.
AI or any kind of technology reference, right? I mean, that's going to be the difference at some point. Some people are going to start caring about it. There's the homesteader that's the sort of doomsday prepper that, type who thinks it's all going to go down and we're going to, and who's going to, whatever. And that's fine. There's probably some of that's going to happen at some point. Um, but really, at the end of the day, it's going to be people that want to produce, like you were talking about, that want to really tap into their humanity in that sense and start creating and growing and raising and caring for, these different, food sources and whatnot, and even all the ancillary things like soap and, medicinal
Hmm.
things and all
Hmm.
the things. I got started. One of them was messing around making bitters because I happen to
Yeah.
enjoy cocktails,
Hmm.
and so that was one of my first kind of forays into, that extraction concept. And I wasn't trying to make a lip balm or, heal a patch of dry skin on my body or whatever. I just wanted to make my cocktails
I
taste
just wanted to
better,
have a drink.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
But it sent me on a path of like, well, what else? Why did this exist? And how come it's been around for
Yeah.
so long? And I joked, hey, I don't play, community league softball. I'm not on a church basketball team, and I'm not restoring a 68 Camaro in the garage. This hobby has become a bit, our life. And
Hmm.
I'd rather wake up in the middle of the night going, gosh, did I really close that paddock or not?
Hmm.
Than some of the other, crap that we sometimes get woken up with, with the stresses of life and things like that.
Well, and again, this kind of goes back to why I think, and I'm no psychologist or anything, but I've, done a lot of reading about this too and studying this for my own health and everything. Why some of us tend to, or a lot of us now are feeling this way and are feeling kind of discontented and, unfulfilled and whatever, or creating problems where there don't need to be problems. Like we create, like humans are always looking for problems, right? We're always looking for what's wrong and what needs to be solved. And because we don't have those everyday things to focus on anymore, like those real problems, like how am I going to eat? Where's my next meal coming from? Is the paddock closed so I don't lose my meat source? Like those were
Right.
the real problem. Like that's what took people's focus for. And now we don't have that. So our mind is freed up to focus on all sorts of trivial stuff that really isn't an issue. But a lot of it is stuff that we don't actually have control over. And so then it feels really big and overwhelming. And then we get depressed. And where if we were just focused on living,
Right.
like we wouldn't give any of our attention to that sort of stuff. So, and to your point about like the bitters and everything too, it just reminded me of like last year we bought an apple press because we got a whole bunch of crab apples from my mother-in-law. Her crab apple tree went off last year, so we decided to start making cider, right? And so that was a new venture for us last year. But I mean, that's what I love and what keeps me going with this lifestyle and what keeps a lot of people going once they're into it is there's like endless things that you can do.
Right.
Everybody thinks of like, yeah, gardening and raising animals and, maybe some canning and preserving. And yes, that's part of it. And we do all that. But once you once you're into this lifestyle, it is a slippery slope, or it's like it starts to snowball where you're like, well, then what about this? I could make this. And oh, I
Right.
never thought about that. And now, yeah, before you know it, you're making your own bitters and you're making your own cider and you're making your own cleaning products and body products and, like all sorts of different things. And, now we're growing grapes and we could make our own wine at some point. Like it just, because you start to realize like a lot of us don't think about it in our modern Western lifestyle. Where does all this stuff come from that we go to the
Right.
store and it's just there? Well, guess what? That stuff's people had to make that stuff back in the day, right? Your soaps, whatever it is, like that was all home industry, right? Cottage
Right.
industry. People, it was called that because you'd make it in the cottage where you lived, right?
Totally.
It wasn't just you go to the store and buy it. And so it starts just opening your eyes up beyond even the standard food to, well, what else? What else could I take control of? What else could I make or produce at home? And I find that that's the real fun part because there's always like you never run out of new things to learn and do.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think my high school told me that I had a first grade art, level, because I can't
Me
draw,
too.
right? I just, so I can't paint. I don't see things that way.
Yeah.
My wife can picture where, furniture looks like in a room or what paint or how the wall should move if it was a rehab or something, like these people on HGTV or whatever. And I'm like, I can't picture any of that, but I can be creative with all these other things. I can figure out how to, understand what these old Italian, men were doing, taking a piece of pig and turning it into this really beautiful thing that you could eat 6 months later.
Mhm.
I'm into that. I can
Mhm.
understand that. My brain works for that. But
Well, and
uh
that's what I mean. That is a creative pursuit as well. I think that truly we are creative beings and that we like to create things and not simply consume things. And everybody's going to find their niche in a different area. And again, that's what's so cool about homesteading is there are lots of different niches within homesteading too. My husband, he's like the handyman, the builder, right? He can build anything. Like he built our chicken coop and he can build our garden beds and he's built a workshop and we've got all sorts of things, right? Like if we need something built, like he doesn't need plans. He doesn't need like he can figure that out. I feel like I'm a bit of a jack of all trades as far as I don't have one area of expertise. But I love, kitchen projects as far as making things, anything that I can basically make in a big pot, whether it's, food that I'm making or canning or something, or like I say, a batch of body butter or candles or something, I like doing that kind of stuff. Funny that you mentioned the art because I was an art teacher for a couple of years. Well, I was a teacher, but they handed the art to me because let's be honest, it's messy with kids and nobody else really wanted to do it. And I was the farthest thing from an artist. I draw like stick figures. It's horrible. But so I just said, okay, we're doing a lot of craft projects this year, right? We're not drawing because I can't draw. So, but I'm like, guess what? There are other ways to be creative as well. And actually, one of the things that we did with that class that I did is we did a Master Chef competition.
oh,
And
that's
I
fun.
got local farms in our area. And that's one of the reasons that I love where we live now in the Comox Valley. There's tons of local farms and the community is big into sustainable agriculture here. So that's another tip is for anybody who's thinking about finding a homestead property, like that's one of the things that I would look for is a community that supports, small scale, like sustainable farming and that sort of thing as well, right? Because outside of yourself, we talk about self-reliance a lot, but self-reliance is also community reliance and being a part of something a little bit bigger. And I think that that has gone a long way where we live. So anyway, there's lots of local farms in the area. And that's where we supplement anything that we can't grow. We try to get locally, but we got a couple of them to donate food to the class, and they got like mystery boxes. So they'd open it up and they'd get whatever ingredients were in there, and they'd have to make a meal out of it. And you know, one of the kids has gone on, he's now like graduating high school, and he opened up his own little donut stand, and he's like going to go into chef school now.
Oh,
And
nice.
I mean, I can't claim that I'm the reason for that, but I will say that it was after that that he started, and his mom was
Going on
emailing me
this
going, he's
path.
really into food now, right? So there are lots of ways to be creative and to find purpose, and you know, for you it might be the meat aspect of things. There's other people that it's the sourdough, or it's the cheese making, or whatever, right? And but there's lots of avenues for that to feel purposeful and creative and productive and put your hand to things in this lifestyle.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. And you touched on it just a second ago, but I wanted to just see if you wanted to add a little bit more into the specific region of
Mhm.
where you live, Canada, Vancouver Island specifically, homesteading, weather, landscape. You
Mhm.
mentioned maybe that the community was pretty supportive. Um, it sounds
Yeah.
like that this way of life is received really well there. This homesteading,
Yeah,
gardening. But tell us a little bit more about that.
it is. Well, starting with the community, it's kind of funny because I wouldn't say that most people where I live use the term homesteading. And I think it depends. Sometimes it depends on kind of political leanings. Like different people will call things different things. In Canada, there's maybe different terminology. Like I've noticed, for example, that in a lot of the Canadian communities, they'll use instead of self-reliant, they'll use the term sovereign, like sovereign or
Oh,
autonomous. Like it's just interesting, like different language around
yeah,
things. And so where we live, I wouldn't say that most people would call it homesteading, but there are a lot of people that are doing it, right? They might just call it more sustainable agriculture or hobby farming or just gardening or whatever. Or maybe they just don't even have a term for it, but, or, you know, regenerative agriculture. Those are all big terms. But a lot of people are doing it regardless. So, like I say, even our next door neighbors, they've got, you know, a good sized garden. So we're trading things with them. And it's very much, a lot of people just have the gardens, have the chickens, have the animals around here. It's just kind of part of life, even if they don't necessarily identify with the term homesteader, if you know what I mean.
sure. Yeah,
Another thing that's fantastic about where we live, so it's called the Comox Valley, and Comox actually means the land of plenty in the native language, right?
that's
So
cool.
the indigenous people that were here before us named it that because it was a great place for growing food. Lots of wild foods grew here, and that is because the soil is very rich because this used to be an ancient seabed, basically. So there's lots of mineral deposits from that
Glaciers
time
and
in history.
all
Yeah,
of it. Yeah,
all of that
sure.
stuff. And so the soil is very rich and fertile here. The growing zone, like our gardening zone, we're about, it depends on exactly where you are in the valley, but we're about a 7B or 8A, which is pretty temperate, like pretty warm, all things considered. For Canada, we're like probably the warmest, most temperate year round. Not that you can grow everything year round, but like we don't have the really cold winters like some areas of Canada get. We also don't tend to get as many super, super hot summers as more inland because we're on the coast. Um, but you know, we have our own weather challenges as well. We do get a lot of rain, which can be good on one hand, but it can also be too much sometimes and cause issues. We have workarounds, for example, like our tomatoes that we grow. We're my husband and I grow a lot of tomatoes. He's like the tomato guy. Of all the garden things, like that's his thing. I kind of do everything else, and he's prunes the tomatoes, and he's really big in. And so every year we put up these tomato shelters that he's built to help protect them from the rain, because we do, like right now we've actually just had a week of rain throughout the summer, and tomatoes can succumb to blight if they get their leaves too wet. And so, you know, we've found workarounds for certain things, and we that's worked really well for us. You know, we are starting to get a lot hotter, drier, more drought prone summers too, so we've had to adapt a bit. But overall, especially for being in Canada, I'd say that this is geographically a fantastic place to garden and to homestead. The downside is it's one of the most expensive places.
Hmm.
It's not as bad as the cities, right? As Vancouver, or, you know, if you're in Toronto or something like that, like those are crazy now. But you know, it would be cheaper for us to move to another province. We've looked at possibly Alberta, or I mean Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Those places are a lot more affordable, but more extreme climates as well, and not as easy to do this in, right? And so it's a toss up. That's where the States is great because there's so many options for you guys. So you've got every gardening zone there and like everything, right?
True.
But for being in Canada, I think we're in a pretty good spot overall.
Yeah, you don't have anything like our American Southwest, do you? You have,
No, no.
above is since you guys are above us, right? You have pretty similar to the Seattle area and Puget Sound, as far as
Yeah.
climate goes, I'd imagine. And you mentioned Saskatchewan, Manitoba.
That'd be
I
like
would
North
imagine,
Dakota,
yeah,
like
North
yeah.
Dakota, Minnesota,
Yeah.
similar probably. So that makes sense. But yeah, there's no American Southwest or the
No.
Deep
We
South or
do
any of
have
that.
actually, we just got back from my sister's wedding in the interior of the province a couple weeks ago. And I mean, it's very similar. I've been through the interior of Washington as well. And so it's very similar to that kind of deserty, dry, like it's like that. And so the summers, it's really great for like fruit growing, like tree fruits, that sort
Hmm.
of thing. They do a lot of that, orchards, vineyards. So we're always picking up fruit and produce in the summer when we're coming
Sure.
back from there because they grow so much of that up there. But then again, they have really extreme winters as well. And at the end of the day, and a lot of forest fire threat up there.
Right.
Right. So
Same
at the
in,
end of
yeah.
the day, I kind of like where we're at. It's pretty much as close to a Goldilocks zone as you can get in Canada for weather and climate and yeah, all that
Yeah,
stuff.
no, that's awesome. Okay, cool. Well, I wanted to shift just a little bit over the last, 10 or 12 minutes. You've got this houseandhomestead.com website, and we'll put a link to all your cool information in the show notes and things like that. But tell me about building this online community and when people go to your website, what are we going to find and how can we be involved and kind of learn, take advantage of the knowledge that you and your husband and others in your community have put together?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I started the house and homestead back in 2017. I had been into the homesteading thing like properly for a couple years at that point, like actually doing the gardening and the canning and all that stuff, right? And I was still working as a teacher actually at that time. And so I have a background I had got my first degree in journalism and then went in teaching and I went on to be a teacher, but I've always loved like creating content, writing, photography, creating content, putting it out there, and also teaching, right? Obviously. And I was on a maternity leave with my daughter at the time and started reading like an ebook or something that I got from someone talking about how they built a blog and turned it into a business. And the light bulb kind of just went off for me that this is because I wasn't really happy doing the teaching thing. Like, I like the teaching aspect, but there's a lot that goes into that too. There's a lot of just babysitting, let's be honest, with young kids and a lot
Sure.
of politics that go into there's just things that I'm like, I just don't know that this is my life path, right? But I like the actual teaching, the passing on of information. And so this light bulb went off that, hey, I could do this and it would be a way for me to create content, do the writing, do all that stuff that I love, teach others, but also be sharing the content and teaching others about something that I'm truly, truly passionate about, which is this homesteading lifestyle. So I just knew like it was just an aha moment for me and I'm just like that's the thing I'm gonna create this blog and I did I did it on the side from work for a year or so before I just decided I wanted to be home with my kids and go all in on it anyway and so the blog ended up turning into a few years later I launched a couple courses. Funnily enough, I launched my gardening course. It's called Seed to Soil and I launched it in the spring of 2020 right before COVID hit. So
So COVID happened the same time where you live compared to the United States?
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Worldwide, right? So we
Oh,
were all going through it at once and I had just put out like a welcome video for that course saying, this is the why behind why we want to grow our own food and one of the reasons why is that it offers food security, right? Not only is it healthier and all these things, but it offers some form of food security because we're just one major disaster away from grocery store shelves being empty. And I kid you not, within a week or two, COVID hit and the store shelves things started flying off the shelves and there was empty shelves for the first time ever. I'm like, wow. So that was good timing. Had a bunch of people really interested in learning that and that signed up for that course. And then from there, people wanted to know then, well, now what do I do with all this produce that I have? Because people, especially if you've never gardened before, you sometimes don't realize that things are seasonal and when the tomatoes start coming they all come at once and you can't eat everything fresh, right? So what do you do with it? And so then I launched my canning course, which is called Yes You Can. And it kind of goes through everything you can. So both courses, the way I modeled them because I've done other courses in the past too, where I learned a lot of the homesteading skills that I have now, but I found them a lot more piecemeal. And I really wanted, like with gardening, I always was asking myself, well, like, now what? What's the next step? And so the way that I modeled it, and the reason it's called seed to soil, is because I literally take you through from the very beginning, from planning out your garden, getting to know your gardening zone, starting your, choosing your seeds, even starting them, caring for seedlings indoors, planting out, direct sowing, all the way to harvesting and putting your gardens, to bed for the winter. Like the whole season, we go through it chronologically, step by step, so you know exactly what to do and when. And then with the canning course, it followed a similar model where it was like, hey, here's how you start, because it's an intimidating thing for a lot of people that have never tried it before.
Especially if
Um,
you get into pressure canning. That is
exactly,
a
right?
huge barrier because it's scary. Some people get scared. I mean, am I going to blow up my house? I remember the first time we turned that sucker on, and we thought we knew a few things, and we're like, "Is this going to really work? Are we going to, have to call the fire department or something like that?" Anyway,
Yeah.
keep
Oh,
going.
I literally hit around the corner the first time I canned green beans. Like because it rattles and like hisses, and I was like, oh, just in case it blows up, I'll just right. And
Right.
then you worry, is it safe now? Did I do it right? Can I feed it to my family? The first
Yeah.
couple batches of things, like I threw out my entire first batch of green beans just because I was like, I think I did it right, but just in case, right?
Just in case.
And my first batch of applesauce, which I water bath canned, I mean, I ate it. I was willing to take the hit just in case something happened, but I was terrified to feed it to my daughter, right? Like, because I just didn't have, now I'm like, canning is like, I can do it blindfolded, right? Even pressure
Right.
canning. But it was a barrier for me at the time too. So I know what it's like to go from not knowing how to do any of this stuff to actually gaining the confidence with it. So again, that course really walks through like every step. And then we go through project. You can do any project you want, but the way that I have it set out is that here's an easy starter. Like applesauce is a very easy one to start with. So that's where we start. And then we get into, jams and pickles and jellies, and then eventually into pressure canning and, stocks and broths and soups and sauces and meats and vegetables, until once you're doing that, like you're doing it, you know what you're doing, right? Um, so that's kind of the courses that I launched. And then from there, I wanted to be able to offer people something that was even more than that, that was really more like about taking control of all areas of our life and
Hmm.
becoming more self-reliant, not just with our food, but with kind of everything. And so rather than doing, a bunch of different courses, I ended up launching a membership program a couple of years ago called the Society of Self-Reliance. And so that also
Cool name.
includes all the gardening course and the canning course and bonus content around all that stuff. But it also, we go through things like emergency preparedness and other aspects of food preservation. So we go through dehydrating and fermenting and um, herbal medicine, right? Growing your own herbs and how to turn them into herbal medicines, and um, even just mindset stuff and physical and mental health. My husband does a whole unit on becoming your own handyman, right? And
Hmm.
learning to be self-reliant when it comes to home repairs and building projects and like just all these different aspects, right? Because there is a lot that goes into it. And like we said before, you can kind of pick and choose what aspects you want to focus on at any one time. But if we have a goal of becoming self-reliant, you quickly do learn that it goes beyond even just the food. And so you quickly become, we anyway became um, really kind of into figuring out like, okay, now we've got that down. Now what else could we do? Now where else could we detach a little bit from the system and take more control over another aspect of our life? And so that's kind of what the membership program is all about.
That's really great. And people find you.
People find me through the blog. Another thing that I did was, for a number of years, I had a digital magazine that I produced called Modern Homesteading Magazine. And so a lot of people found me that way and were subscribed to the magazine, but I only was able to offer it digitally because I'm in Canada and people really wanted print. But I was a pretty small, like I didn't have advertisers or anything. It was just really me and a layout designer and a couple of writers that would help out and stuff. And people kept saying, well, this is great, but I really want print. I really want print. And I crunched the numbers every which way, and I could not make it affordable and sustainable at the same time, let alone profitable. And that's only gotten worse, right? With the increasing costs of things. But the printing and shipping and everything it was too much. So I decided at the end of last year to retire that. I did do a print commemorative issue
Oh,
for
cool.
everybody, almost more of as a thank you. I didn't like earn money off it, but we broke even and I was able to offer that. And then right as that door kind of closed and I announced that I wasn't doing that anymore, the folks over at Homestead Living magazine contacted me. I've had a relationship with Melissa K. Norris of Pioneering Today podcast and academy for a number of years. I've guest posted for her on her blog before, and I used to help transcribe her podcast. And I was in her membership program when she first launched it years ago.
Oh,
And
nice.
that's where I've learned a lot from her as well. So they approached me and said, "Hey, we actually are looking for an editor for our new monthly magazine. Would you like to come on with us?" And so I'm doing that with them now and connecting with a lot of people that way as well. So yeah, and then now going to these in-person festivals and conferences and connecting with people in person too, which is really cool, right?
So from starting a blog and growing a few things in your condo or apartment, and now you're in person, online, in print,
Yeah.
membership classes, and still raising your family with your husband and growing just a few more things probably, and all that.
Mhm.
And I think that's a pretty cool journey.
Yeah.
I love that. I was going to ask you how the transition went from your own magazine to Homestead Living, and you covered it really, really well. We'll give you a chance to kind of share how people can get involved here in a second, but I always like to ask a couple of fun questions just so people can get to know you. You okay with that?
Yeah, shoot.
So I don't know if you have time to watch TV at all, or anything like that, but if you are, channel surfing or, something shows up somewhere, what's a movie that you always stop just for even a few minutes, just because you just can't help yourself. It's either
Oh
funny
man.
or it's awesome or
Oh
whatever,
man. This has nothing to do with homesteading at all, but
right?
Dumb
Usually it
and Dumber
doesn't.
is my favorite movie of all time. I can watch that a million times over and still die laughing every time we watch it. So Dumb and Dumber is definitely my
You're bi
movie.
you're biased because Jim Carrey's Canadian,
Of
probably.
course. Oh, it was just him in his heyday, though. I said it's funny. Somehow he came up the other day, and I said, because you don't really see much of him now. You see
Uh-uh.
but he's not really in anything. And I said, I think that's a good thing because he doesn't really fizzle out. He's got that era that was like the Jim Carrey era. He's
And
just
he
hilarious.
ruled the world. Yeah,
Oh man, it's so good. And so many little,
totally.
sayings and whatever come out of that. So that's my favorite for movies for
That's a good
sure.
one. What? Here's another one. What is the last book you read or are reading?
Okay. So last book I read actually is very much homesteading related, and it was Old Fashioned on Purpose by Jill Winger.
Hmm.
So Jill, her blog is The Prairie Homestead, and she's another one that I've followed or been in touch with. And her and I have are like I took one of her homesteading and business programs a while back. Met her at the Homestead Festival this year for the first time. Got to write a really cool feature article on her for the magazine earlier in the year. And she recently wrote a book called Old Fashioned on Purpose. And it really is kind of about what I talked about at the beginning of this podcast about how, we're more comfortable than ever, but yet our health is suffering, physical and mental health, and all these things are suffering more than ever. And it's because we've gotten away from kind of the way that we used to live and putting our hand to things and doing this. And so the whole book is going through these different aspects of not just homesteading and gardening and growing food and doing the cooking and preserving it, but like how to build community the old fashioned way in
Hmm.
person and find fulfillment through going back to the traditional ways that we used to do things, the way that we're kind of wired to do things. So that's the last book I read. And then kind of following suit with that, I'm currently reading The Anxious Generation by
Hmm.
Jonathan Haidt, and it's about specifically it's about Gen Z. So kind of I guess that's like the early to mid 20s and younger generation now, but the generation that's essentially grown up with social media and with a phone in
Right.
their hand and why they're anxious, right? And again, this all ties into what we were talking about. Like, and again, a lot of it is because they're not having those in-person interactions. They're not having to go and get outside and do anything, right? They're not going out and touching grass as the kids say these days. They're inside on devices all the time and they're riddled with anxiety, and depression rates have gone up, and then also like how can we turn this around? So that's a really eye-opening
I
book. I
bet.
highly recommend. Yeah.
How many children do you guys have?
We have two.
Yeah,
So I
two.
have an
Okay, so you're right in
8-year-old
the.
daughter. I have an 8-year-old daughter and I have a 1.5-year-old son. And so it's definitely something that's on my mind all the time of
I bet.
how to, yeah.
How to navigate,
Hmm.
as it keeps going. Um, just one or two more, if you don't mind. What is one of your favorite quotes, or words to live by? Your emails, we get those, and it always seems to have, both in the Homestead Living version as well as your own from House
Hmm.
and Homestead, something inspirational. So I imagine
Hmm.
you have something that you draw on or find strength from.
Hmm. That's a really tough one, especially because I actually do source the quotes for homestead living. So there are so many good ones out there, depending on what it is you're going for. So there's two that come to mind. One that I have shared before, I think in both the magazine and my blog, but it's The Man in the Arena by Teddy
Sure. Teddy
Roosevelt, about
Roosevelt.
how
Yep.
it's not the critic who counts, it's the man in the arena who's actually doing the thing. Because again, I think with anything, but with homesteading as well, we can get so caught up in what other people think or how other people are doing things or whatever, when if we're just focused on like doing the thing, that's what matters. It doesn't matter who's criticizing you for doing the thing, because they're sitting back and like it's about just getting in there and doing it, right? So I won't, that's a long quote, but I highly recommend looking it up. So The Man in the Arena. And then the other one is not necessarily a quote, but it's a story that I tend to share actually usually around this time of year when the harvest is coming on. It's mid-August right now, and it always tends to come up at this time of year, but it's actually one of Aesop's fables. And it's called The Ants and the Grasshopper. Are you familiar with this one?
I
You,
am.
you know, yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. And so the moral of the story is the ants work hard all summer putting away food for winter. Meanwhile, the grasshopper's dancing and playing the fiddle and enjoying a good time. And he's the one laughing at the ants and, ha ha ha, why are you working so hard? And you could just be living it up and playing the fiddle and blah. And then by the time winter comes around, he's freezing and hungry outside, knocking at the door. And in the nice sanitized version, the ants open the door and they welcome him in and they feed him, and everybody lives happily ever after. But of course, just like Grimm's fairy tales, right? In the
The
original version,
original.
the ants open the door and they eat the grasshopper. So the moral of the story is put in the work, right? It is worth
Yeah.
it to put in the work and don't
And then
spend
you
all
can
day
eat your
fiddling,
enemies.
and then you can eat your enemies later on, or but you'll be better off, right? And that doesn't mean that we can get too caught up in that too. And I think there's something to be learned from the grasshopper, right? I think sometimes in our culture we can work ourselves too much and we can become burnt out and all this stuff, and that can be certainly true for homesteading too. So I think it's really important to remember to take breaks and to just enjoy it too.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, it is work, but we do it for a reason. And it's so that later on we can sit back and we can enjoy the fruits of our labor.
Oh, yeah, really well said. I love it. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you for taking time. Where can people find out more information about you and your work?
Yeah, so you can find me online at thehouseandhomestead.com. And then you can access my courses and my membership through there if you're interested in that at all. And I've got lots of free content on the blog too. I also actually have a free ebook that people can access. I'm just looking at the URL now because I'm like, oh, I forget what it is, where to get it. So it's called Homestead Wherever You Are. And once again, it's about just that, right? Like whether you're in the city, in a condo or apartment, or you're on, in the suburbs, or you're on acreage, I break down exactly what you can do in all of these areas, right? Like no matter where you live and in different areas of homesteading, whether it's how you can grow food in these different different size spaces, or how you can, what you can be doing in the kitchen, or what you can be doing around the home, or to just live more of a homestead lifestyle. So you can get that at thehouseandhomestead.com/homestead dash anywhere, and grab the free ebook from there.
Oh,
And then you
that's
can also
awesome.
find me. Sorry, I should also mention that I'm also editor of Homesteading Monthly magazine. So if you are not subscribed to that yet, you can check out homesteadliving.com. And that is a monthly print and digital magazine. So you can subscribe there. And we feature tons of great homesteaders every month, people with various, different expertise in different things. We've got, people like Joel Salatin, which a lot of people like. Joel was in Food Inc. and he was the gateway for a lot of people into this lifestyle. So he's a regular columnist for us, and lots of other really big name homesteading experts that we're featuring every month with lots of great knowledge to share. So
Love it. It was a highlight meeting him at the conference in Coeur d'Alene. And the one that I really liked, I met lots of people, so it's hard to rank them. But I thought that Temple Grandin being there as the keynote was just fantastic. We got a picture
mhm.
with her, and I don't know, I like almost got emotional. I don't know why. I
Yeah.
mean, like I don't have an autistic kid that I know of, or anything like that, or anything. There wasn't like close to home in that sense. It was just the impact that she had had, on the cattle and even just animal veterinary, industries. is just was overwhelming. So it was really
Hmm.
cool
Yeah.
to meet some of the stars, if you want to call it that.
Well, there were some really cool people there. And like you say, you and I were there, and you're also a contributor to the magazine. And so if anybody who's listening is not subscribed yet, you got to subscribe
Get
because
on
then you're
it.
going to get all of Mike's awesome content as well of your butchering and meat smoking and really delicious recipes. Do you know, I think I mentioned last time I was editing one of your articles and recipes, and it was like about a Chicago meat sandwich or something. My mouth was literally watering. I had to go down to our local butcher or call my husband, like, you got to pick up like a sandwich for me in the butcher.
Yeah.
And I just made, you had mentioned that it's usually topped with jardinera.
Yep. From the
And so
garden.
I literally just made jardinera so that I can make my own sandwiches. Like that's the impact you had on me with that recipe. I'm like, I
That's
got to make
awesome.
this now. So I made my own jardinera so that I can have a proper Chicago meat
Chicago beef.
sandwich.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, no, it's funny that you we're actually having that tonight. I've
Oh,
been
too funny.
while we've
Good.
been chatting, I've been smoking some of the meat, and we had a jar actually of jardinera from one of our homestead friends that gave it to us because they had over canned or whatever. You know, like these things happen, right? And so we gave
Hmm.
her whatever we were given. You know, anyway,
Well, I'm going to share
that's
my
really
recipe
funny.
this weekend. I decided to make it into a fermenting recipe because I'm like, hey, then
Oh,
it
absolutely.
can be healthy too, gut healthy. So I'm going to be sharing that this weekend actually on the blog. So
Oh, that's cool. Look for it.
yeah,
Well,
awesome.
Anna, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for your time, and we'll definitely stay in touch with Homestead Living and all the other fun things. But we'll make sure we send out some good follow-up information to all the folks, and that they can find your content and be a part of your community that you've built. And what's cool about what you're doing is you'd never, it's not isolated, right? We're not. This is not a, Vancouver Island thing. This is a wherever you're at, you can do this thing. And I think that's what's really cool. And that's the message and spirit I think that you've kind of communicated. And I think it's really cool that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a global movement right now. I get people messaging from all over the world with everything that's happened in the last few years and things continuing to be uncertain, we'll just say, right? I think more and more people are coming to this lifestyle because they're realizing that these systems that we've built up are actually quite fragile and prone to failing if we're not careful. And, people are wanting to have more control over some of the areas of their life that really matter, like their food.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's been a pleasure and we'll talk to you real soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.
Bye.